Evan Carter had made a promise to his daughter that no matter how tight things got, Christmas would always feel like magic. So on that cold December evening, he brought 7-year-old Lily to Wonderland Park, the sprawling amusement center on the edge of Portland that transformed into a winter fantasy every holiday season. The entrance fee had cost him a full day's wages from his construction job. But watching Lily's eyes grow wide at the towering Christmas tree and the cascading fake snow made every dollar worth it. He had no way of knowing that this night would change everything, that a single act of kindness would collide with a mother's worst fear and open doors to a world he never imagined entering. The park pulsed with life. Thousands of families moved through the decorated pathways, their laughter mixing with Christmas carols blasting from hidden speakers. Evan held Lily's mittened hand as they navigated through the crowd, past vendors selling hot cocoa and roasted chestnuts, past the spinning teacups wrapped in twinkling lights, past the long lines snaking toward Santa's workshop. Lily tugged him toward the carousel, its painted horses rising and falling beneath a canopy of golden stars. They were halfway there when Evan felt something collide with his leg. He looked down to find a little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, clutching his jeans with both fists. Her face was stray with tears, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She wore an expensive-looking white coat with fur trim, but one of her patent leather shoes had come unbuckled. And her dark curls were wild around her face. She looked up at Evan with enormous brown eyes filled with absolute terror. "Hey, hey," Evan said, crouching down immediately. But the girl only cried harder, burying her face against his knee. Evan felt his heart clench. He knew that kind of fear, the primal panic of a child separated from their parent. He'd seen it once in Lily years ago at a grocery store, and the memory still haunted him. Lily knelt beside him, her expression serious. Beyond her years. "It's all right," she said softly to the girl. "My daddy's really nice. He'll help you find your mommy." The girl lifted her head slightly, her sobs quieting to hiccups. She looked at Lily, at this other child who seemed so calm and sure, and something in her small body relaxed just a fraction. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Evan asked gently. "Sophie," the girl managed between shuddering breaths. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Evan, and this is my daughter, Lily. Can you tell me what your mommy looks like?" But Sophie's face crumpled again. "I don't know where she went. There were so many people. And then she was gone and I couldn't find her. And I looked everywhere. And okay, Evan said, his voice steady even as his mind raced. He scanned the crowd looking for anyone who seemed to be searching frantically for a child. The sea of faces was overwhelming: families, couples, groups of teenagers, all moving in different directions beneath the artificial snowfall. Finding one specific person in this chaos would be nearly impossible. "Let's go to the security station," he decided. "They'll be able to help us find your mom." He stood and Sophie immediately reached for his hand. The gesture was automatic, trusting, and it made something ache deep in Evan's chest. He took her small fingers in his, noting how cold they were, despite her expensive coat. With Lily holding his other hand, he began making his way toward the main security office near the park center. The journey was slow and difficult. The crowd seemed to grow thicker with every step, bodies pressing in from all sides. Sophie whimpered each time someone jostled past them, her grip on Evan's hand tightening to the point of pain. He lifted her onto his hip. Without thinking, the way he'd carried Lily through countless crowds when she was smaller, and she immediately wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face against his shoulder. "We're almost there," he told her softly. "You're being so brave, Sophie." The security station was a small building designed to look like a gingerbread house, complete with candy cane columns and a frosted roof. But the cheerful exterior couldn't mask the tension inside. A line of anxious parents stretched out the door, each one clutching photos on their phones, each one wearing the same expression of barely contained panic. Evan felt Sophie tense against him as she took in the scene. All these other lost children, all these other frightened families. Inside, 2 exhausted-looking security guards were fielding questions from multiple directions. Radios crackled with updates. A whiteboard on the wall listed descriptions of 6 different lost children. Their locations last seen marked with color-coded pins on a large map of the park. "Sir, we're doing our best," one guard was saying to a father who looked ready to tear the building apart. "We've got teams searching every section of the park." Evan waited his turn, bouncing Sophie gently to keep her calm. When he finally reached the counter, a young woman with a Santa hat perched on her head looked up at him with tired eyes that had seen too many frightened children tonight. "Lost child," she asked, already reaching for a form. Found, actually, Evan said. Her name is Sophie. She got separated from her mother somewhere in the park and doesn't know where she went. The guard's expression softened slightly. Sophie, okay, let me check our list. She scanned her computer screen, frowning. We don't have a missing child report yet for a Sophie. What does mom look like, honey? Sophie just shook her head against Evan's shoulder, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She's pretty shaken up, Evan explained. She hasn't been able to tell me much about her mother. The guard sighed, rubbing her temples. Look, I'm going to be honest with you. We're completely overwhelmed tonight. This is our busiest event of the year. And we've had more lost children than usual. We've got teams out searching, but honestly, your best bet might be to stay in the main areas where parents typically look. The carousel, the big tree, the merry-go-round. If you can keep her calm and visible in those spots, there's a good chance mom will find you before we do. It wasn't the answer Evan had hoped for, but he understood the reality. The park was enormous, the crowd was massive, and there were only so many security personnel to go around. He thanked the guard and stepped back outside. Sophie, still clinging to him like he was the only solid thing in a spinning world. Daddy, Lily said, tugging his sleeve. Maybe we should go to the merry-go-round. Sophie might feel better if she can watch the horses. And maybe her mommy will come there looking for her. Evan looked at his daughter, at her earnest face and her kind heart, and felt a swell of pride so intense it nearly knocked him over. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart. Let's go. The merry-go-round stood at the heart of the park, its antique horses gleaming under thousands of tiny white lights. The carousel was a genuine antique brought over from Germany in the 1920s and lovingly restored to its original glory. Each horse had been hand-painted with intricate details, flowers and ribbons and golden trim that caught the light with every rotation. A crowd had gathered to watch, their faces illuminated by the gentle glow. Parents lifting children onto shoulders for a better view. Couples holding hands as the music played its gentle waltz. Evan found a spot near the entrance where they could see and be seen. Positioning them beneath a large candy cane arch that would be easy to spot from a distance, he lowered Sophie to the ground, keeping one hand on her shoulder to let her know he wasn't going anywhere. Your mommy might come here looking for you, he explained. So, we're going to stay right here where she can find us easily. Okay, Sophie nodded, her tears finally beginning to dry. She watched the carousel spin, her small body slowly relaxing against Evan's leg. As the gentle music played, Lily stood beside her, pointing out the different horses. The white one with roses in its mane, the black one with golden hooves, the dappled gray with ribbons streaming from its bridle. Sophie began asking questions about each horse, her voice growing steadier with each one. After a while, Evan lifted Sophie onto his shoulders so she could see better and feel safer above the crowd. The little girl's hands gripped his hair gently as she gazed at the spinning lights, and for a moment, she seemed to forget her fear entirely, and somewhere across the park, a mother was losing her mind. Alexandra Pierce had built a billion-dollar empire on her ability to stay calm under pressure. She had negotiated hostile takeovers without breaking a sweat, faced down boardrooms full of men who wanted to see her fail, and rebuilt her company from near bankruptcy after her husband's death left her with nothing but debt and a 6-month-old daughter. But none of that mattered now. None of her money, her power, her carefully cultivated composure meant anything in this moment because her daughter was missing. She had turned away for 30 seconds. 30 seconds to answer an urgent call from her assistant about a last-minute change to tomorrow's charity gala. When she looked back, Sophie was gone. The crowd had swallowed her daughter whole, and Alexandra's entire world had collapsed into a single screaming point of terror. She searched everywhere. She pushed through families, ignored the irritated looks, called Sophie's name until her voice went. Her security team, 2 men who usually stayed at a discreet distance, fanned out across the park, communicating through earpieces. But the updates kept coming back the same. No sign of her. No sign of her. No sign of her. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Alexandra's legs were shaking, her designer heels completely inappropriate for this kind of frantic searching. She'd torn her cashmere wrap on a fence post and hadn't even noticed. Her perfectly styled hair had come loose from its pins, strands falling across her face as she ran. Every blonde child she spotted made her heart stop. And every time it wasn't Sophie, she died a little more inside. The Christmas lights that had seemed so magical an hour ago now felt like a cruel joke. Their cheerful twinkling mocking her terror. She thought about every moment she'd been too busy to play with Sophie. Every bedtime story she'd delegated to the nanny. Every promise she'd broken because work came first. Every school play she'd missed because of a meeting that seemed so important at the time. If something happened to her daughter, she would never forgive herself. She would give up everything, her company, her fortune, her entire empire, just to have Sophie back safe in her arms. When the call finally came through her earpiece, "Ma'am, we may have found her. Someone matching Sophie's description is near the merry-go-round." Alexandra was already running. She burst through the crowd like a woman possessed, shoving aside anyone who got in her way. The merry-go-round came into view, its cheerful music suddenly sounding like a mockery of everything she was feeling. And then she saw them. A man tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a worn canvas jacket. He had Sophie on his shoulders, her small hands gripping his hair, and he was pointing up at something. The lights maybe or the fake snow drifting down from hidden machines. Sophie was smiling. She was smiling while Alexandra had been dying of fear. And this stranger had her daughter on his shoulders like he had every right to touch her child. Something snapped inside Alexandra. Every news story she'd ever read about child abductions. Every warning about predators in crowded places. Every nightmare she'd had since becoming a mother, it all crashed together into a single blinding wave of rage and terror. She didn't think, she just acted. "Get away from her," Alexandra screamed, launching herself at the man. She grabbed Sophie, yanking her off his shoulders with enough force to make the child cry out in surprise. "Don't you touch her. Don't you ever touch my daughter." The man stumbled backward, his hands raised in surrender. He was saying something, his mouth moving, but Alexandra couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears and the Christmas music blaring from nearby speakers. Sophie was crying now, really crying. And Alexandra clutched her so tight she could feel the rapid flutter of her daughter's heartbeat against her own chest. A crowd was forming around them. People with their phones out, security guards pushing through, voices overlapping in a cacophony of confusion and accusation. Alexandra saw the man's daughter, a little girl about Sophie's age, with neat braids looking up at her with wide, frightened eyes, and some distant part of her brain registered that this didn't look right, that something about this scene was wrong. But she couldn't think past the animal need to protect her child. "Ma'am, please calm down," a security guard was saying. "Sir, can you explain what's happening here?" "I was helping her," the man said, his voice remarkably steady despite the chaos swirling around him. "She was lost. We were waiting here for her mother to find her." "Liar," Alexandra spat. "You had her on your shoulders. You were carrying her somewhere." "I was showing her the lights on the tree. She was scared and I was trying to distract her while we waited for you." "Mommy, stop." Sophie's voice cut through the noise, high and desperate. "Mommy, stop it. He helped me. He's nice. He and Lily helped me find you." Alexandra went completely still. She looked down at her daughter, at Sophie's tear-stained face. At the way she was reaching toward the stranger's little girl with one hand, even while she clung to Alexandra with the other. "What?" Alexandra whispered. "I got lost," Sophie said, her voice trembling. "And I was so scared, Mommy. And then I found Evan and Lily, and they helped me. They took me to the security place, and then we came here so you could find me." Evan said, "You'd probably come here looking. He saved me, Mommy. He was saving me." The world shifted beneath Alexandra's feet. She looked at the man, Evan, and saw him clearly for the first time. The kindness in his eyes, the protective arm around his own daughter, the complete absence of threat in his posture. He wasn't a predator. He was a father, a good father who had done exactly what she would have wanted any decent person to do if they found a lost child. And she had just attacked him in front of hundreds of people. The shame hit her like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. Her whole body was shaking now, the adrenaline crash combining with the horror of what she'd done to make her feel like she might collapse right there on the pavement. "I'm sorry," she finally managed, her voice barely audible above the crowd noise. "I'm so sorry. I thought it's okay," Evan said, though his face was pale and his daughter was pressed against his leg, clearly frightened by everything that had happened. "You were scared, I understand." But Alexandra couldn't accept his grace. Not yet, not when she could still feel the echo of her own accusations ringing in her ears. Not when she could see the curious phone still pointed in her direction. She pulled Sophie closer, mumbled another apology, and retreated into the crowd before she could make things any worse. Her security team flanked her immediately, creating a bubble of space as she made her way back toward the VIP section of the park. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen Evan watching her go. His expression not angry but sad. The look of a man who understood fear intimately, who had perhaps felt that same terror himself, and who bore her no ill will despite everything she had done. 15 minutes later, Alexandra sat in the private lounge, reserved for the park's most generous donors. Sophie curled in her lap. Her hands had finally stopped shaking. But the guilt had only grown stronger with each passing moment. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, the way she'd grabbed Sophie, the accusations she'd hurled, the fear in that little girl's eyes as she watched a stranger attack her father. She thought about what kind of example she had set for her own daughter, what Sophie must think of her now. She had to make it right. She had no idea how, but she had to try. Marcus, she said to the head of her security team, find him. Marcus hesitated. Ma'am, are you sure that's wise? After what happened out there, I accused an innocent man of being a predator in front of hundreds of people. Alexandra cut him off, her voice tight. I need to apologize properly. Find him. 20 minutes later, Evan and Lily stood at the entrance to the VIP lounge, looking profoundly uncomfortable. Evan had cleaned up slightly, wiped the fake snow from his jacket, smoothed down his hair, but there was no hiding the worn edges of his clothes or the weariness in his eyes. He looked like a man who had wandered into the wrong world entirely, and knew it. Alexandra rose to meet them, Sophie, sliding off her lap to stand beside her. The massive Christmas tree behind them cast everything in a warm golden glow, but it did nothing to ease the chill of Alexandra's embarrassment. Thank you for coming, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the words. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after the way I behaved. You were scared, Evan said again, the same words he'd used before. Any parent would be. That doesn't excuse what I did. Alexandra took a deep breath, steadying herself. I accused you of something terrible. In public, in front of your daughter, in front of hundreds of strangers with their phones out. There's no excuse for that. I appreciate the apology, Evan said carefully. But honestly, we're fine. You don't owe us anything else. Yes, I do. Alexandra glanced down at Sophie, who was staring at Lily with undisguised longing. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about your daughter since we got back here. Apparently, Lily was very kind to her. When she was scared, Lily, who had been hiding behind her father's leg, peered out shyly. Sophie was really scared, she said simply. I didn't want her to be scared anymore. Alexandra felt something shift in her chest, a softening she hadn't expected. She looked at this child in her second-hand coat and her carefully braided hair, and she saw a kindness that had nothing to do with money or status or social position. A kindness that was simply part of who this little girl was. That was very sweet of you, Alexandra said softly. Daddy says we should always help people when they're scared, Lily added solemnly. Because someone might help us someday when we're scared, too. Alexandra's eyes moved to Evan. He looked embarrassed by his daughter's words, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. But he didn't contradict her. He just stood there, one hand on Lily's shoulder, radiating a quiet dignity that Alexandra found unexpectedly moving. Your father sounds like a very wise man, she said. He's the best daddy in the whole world, Lily said with absolute certainty. Sophie tugged on Alexandra's hand. Mommy, can Lily come play with me? Please, I want to show her the special playground. Alexandra hesitated. She had intended to apologize and let them go to close this uncomfortable chapter and never think about it again. But Sophie's face was so hopeful, more animated than Alexandra had seen her in months. And Lily was looking at Sophie with equal eagerness. Of course, she heard herself say. The next hour unfolded in ways Alexandra hadn't anticipated. She had expected awkwardness, stilted conversation, two worlds colliding uncomfortably. Instead, she found herself watching Sophie and Lily play together in the VIP area's private playground.